And it's once more my pleasure to invite my colleague Rabbi Richard Adris up to do a teaching with us about Jewish sacred aging. How can we learn to stay healthy and also stay connected to our tradition as we grow older? And Rabbi Adris, please.
Here. How much time do you want me to take, in all seriousness? 15 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour and a half?
15 to 20. How long have you guys got today?
No. Okay, hi, Shabbat Shalom. I think this is, the green light's on.
I have to adjust my neck out.
And you have a thing on me. Is that the video? Okay. Anyway, so my assignment with you this morning is to talk about, or try to introduce you to a subject which is increasingly requested for the work that I do in Jewish sacred aging. And we'll have more to say about that in the luncheon. And that is the approach to health and wellness. And it really is interesting that it appears on this particular Torah portion, Pekudei, which ends the book of Exodus, but also talks about the completion of the work of the building of the Mishkan. And as you know, and when I teach Torah study, I have a regular Torah study class at the JCC in Cherry Hill. We teach this as a lot of the Torah language is metaphorical language. And one of the ways that the Jewish approach to health and wellness, which is really important as we get older, because as we alluded to last night, the baby boom generation has really pushed a lot of this reintroduction of how to stay healthy. Part of it is the denial of death, but it's a long conversation which we don't have time to go into as to why this has become so important. But the Mishkan is the house of God, and metaphorically, this body, in many ways, is the Mishkan. And what we do to it and how we treat it has a huge background and vocabulary in sacred Jewish text. So I'm going to allude to a study guide that we prepare when we go out and do a whole workshop on this, and we take a couple of hours to unpack all this text. We're not going to do that this morning because the Torah is waiting, and the Torah can get very impatient if you keep it waiting too long. So I'm going to just briefly, hopefully, run through a couple of ideas. I just want to plant in your minds some of the power of the tradition. We are part of a tradition that is so powerful and so contemporary, even though it is thousands of years old. One of the challenges is we don't teach you enough of this stuff. So to begin with, two texts. Here's a text from Leviticus Rabbah, that is the great midrash on the book of Leviticus. And it takes place, it's a midrash about Rabbi Hillel. And it goes like this, and listen to the theological statement, which is a theological statement that underpins much, if not all, of Judaism's approach to why you should stay healthy. A story is told of Hillel, that when he had finished his lesson with his pupils, he accompanied them part of the way. And they said to him, "Master, where are you going?" And he said, "To perform a religious duty." And they asked, "What religious duty?" And he said, "I'm going to take a bath in the bathhouse." And they said, "Is this a religious obligation?" To which Hillel replied, "If someone is appointed to scrape and clean the statues of the king that are set up in the theaters and circuses, and is paid to do that work, and furthermore associates that with nobility, how much the more so should I, who am created in the divine image, take care of my own body?" It's a lovely text to teach because it really gives you an understanding of what the Jewish approach is to this whole situation of staying healthy. Why is it incumbent upon you to take care of your body and stay healthy? Because you are created how? In the image and likeness of God, Salam Elohim. So therefore, if you abuse your body, if you treat it poorly, if you put junk into it, if you deface it, not only are you doing that against your own body, but you are by definition and by extension, according to the theological position of Judaism, you are defaming your relationship to God, because you are a vessel, a sacred vessel of the sacred. Therefore, there's a whole series of texts that illustrate this. And the power of this appears throughout our tradition. If you will go to page 144, this is why this stuff is so cool, because it's very contemporary. In the prayer book, not the Torah commentary, the prayer book. I want to introduce you to a concept that we're going to just take a look at Maimonides very briefly. This is a lot of fun to study, and we usually, in the workshop that we do as part of Jewish, it literally does, it's about a 2-hour workshop. But I want you to look at this one prayer. Here's your test for this morning. Your test for this morning is, when do we say this, when does the Jew say this prayer? It's in every single morning service. And we'll do the English for those of you who may not be familiar with the Hebrew. Blessed are you, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified our lives with mitzvah and enjoined us upon the washing of the hands. By the way, the washing of the hands is very important, not only nitiliat yadayim, but there's a Talmudic phrase from Yoma, one of the tractates, which basically says before you do anything, you have to wash your hands, because you don't know if there are diseases being carried by whatever you're touching, including food. This is Talmudic. This is 5th, 6th century. That the scholars of the Torah already figured out, the scholars of the Talmud already figured out that washing of the hands can delay the onset or perhaps prevent the onset of disease. But look at this paragraph. Here's your test. When do we say this? Other than in Shachrit. Praised are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has fashioned the human body with sublime wisdom. Listen to the theology. Creating an intricate network of veins, arteries, structures, and organs, each of which must function properly for our survival. The English is not literal to the Hebrew. Praised are you, O Lord, who heals all creatures and performs wonders. But if you go to who knows Hebrew here? Okay, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's right. But it's right in the book, dude. So, just correct the prayer book. The people who put the translate. A lot of times, committees who do prayer books, they mess around with the literalness of the Hebrew. They should not have. Some of the translations in some of the newer prayer books actually do a literal translation. So, in the next syllable. If one of them opens that shouldn't, or yisatein echad mihem, or doesn't close, it would be impossible to stand before you. Okay? In other words, this prayer, literally, the Hebrew is quite literal. Basically, it says, you have stuff that should open. If it doesn't open, or stuff that should close, and if it doesn't close, you would be unable to stand before God. When does the Jew say this prayer? Come on. What? No, come on. You could have it. You could get a prize. What? Think.
Somebody said the morning prayer.
It's the morning, but it's not the first prayer. That's the first prayer that the Jew says in the morning is, thank you, God, I got up. Well, considering the alternative. What do most of us do? It's the bathroom prayer. Now look, this is why this stuff is so fun. You were afraid to say that, weren't you?
I knew it.
I knew you knew it, but that's okay. But look, that's why the Hebrew is so powerful. It basically says, look, if some of the stuff that's supposed to open doesn't open, and if some of the stuff that's supposed to close doesn't close, we call this the veins and arteries prayer, because that's really what the Hebrew is. You would be unable to stand in life before God. It's not like you're not going to be able to run a marathon. But the theology is, look, this intricate network of veins and arteries that has been created, if it doesn't function, you would not be able to worship God correctly. So the Jewish approach, traditionally, theologically, is that's the fundamental connection. Not I'm going to be able to run a marathon, but you won't be able to pray properly. Look, when we're sick, think about when we're sick. When we're sick, we don't care about anything else. We just want to get better. So the prayer literally speaks to the fact that when we're not feeling well, nothing else really matters. We want to get better. Here's another insight from the prayer book. This is, okay, I got to hurry up. No, because I want to be respectful of your time, the service time, the luncheon time, so I'll talk fast. There's another prayer that in the daily Amidah, not the Shabbat Amidah, because we just do this to confuse rabbinic students and cantorial students. There's nothing consistent. That's why we have 2 Talmuds, just to make life more difficult for us. So there's several Amidot. In the daily one, there's this wonderful prayer which says, listen carefully, your next quiz. Heal us, O Lord, and we shall be healed. Save us, O Lord, and we shall be saved. Blessed is God, the healer of the sick. Okay? What does the Jew pray for? Health. Here's this fantastic insight. What does the Jew not pray for? Doesn't pray for a cure. When I first started studying this and I realized this, I was like literally blown away. Because if you lined up every rabbi and cantor and doctor and asked, I just did this to a group of medical students on Thursday in Philly, in outside of Philly, one of the medical schools. We know, and some of you know, people who have passed away, but they have been spiritually healed. They may not have been cured of their disease. So look at the insight that our tradition gives us. It says there are possibilities that you cannot be cured of a disease. But there is a possibility that you can be healed spiritually. And this is a high holiday sermon which you're not getting, but look at the insight of it, that there's this fine connection between health and the psyche and the soul. And if you go back to that page 144, the very next prayer, after the body prayer, is a prayer for the what? Soul. The soul. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahora. What I'm going to suggest to you that this gives us an insight is one of the most powerful things I think that the Jewish tradition has to do with medicine. And by the way, I'm going to suggest to you one of the most interesting adult education studies that you can do is the whole study of Judaism in medicine. And the role of the physician and the role of medicine is fascinating. You'll really love it. But on page 144 on the prayer book, you actually see this juxtaposition of the body, the veins and arteries prayer, and the Elohai neshama shenatata bi prayer, the soul. When you put this together, you understand that Judaism understands that there is a finite link, there's this wonderful link between the body, the mind, and the soul. We call this in contemporary 21st century language, holistic medicine. But here's a thing, boys and girls. It's not New Age. This is who we are. This is Judaism. We don't teach you this, and that's our fault. But you need to know this. Study the text. One of the most powerful proponents of this type of an approach, this holistic approach, the interconnection of body, mind, and soul, is somebody that I urge you to take some time and study, and that is Moses Maimonides, who is the court physician to the Sultan of Cairo in the 1100s, 12th century. So we're going to go back. He was born in Spain. He worked in Egypt and passed away. And those of you who've been to Israel 101 have probably been to his grave, I think it's either Tiberias or Tzfat. I don't remember. Where's his grave? Do you remember? Thank you. Nothing like a wise rabbi. Thank you very much. whack. I know it's guarded by a lot of people when the day I was there, but listen to this. Maimonides wrote about a tremendous amount of literature on his practice of medicine, okay? And some of it, I have to find this text. Am I popping my piece too much? Should I move this down? I'm going to mess up your, okay? So listen to this. Listen to these. This is quotations from Maimonides. You're dealing with a text that these are written in the 1100s, in the 12th century, okay? Maimonides addresses the connection between the mind and the body in many of his writings. Perhaps the clearest expression of this holistic approach to the psychological and physical health is found in his letter to the Sultan, the son of Saladin the Great, whose reign began in 1198. And he writes, "Let the physician remember that every ill person's heart is constricted, and every healthy person's heart is broadened. Therefore, let the physician relieve the patient of his psychological problems, which bring him to despondence. This will strengthen the patient's general health and is the first step in the treatment of any ill person." But listen to this. He writes about how to treat somebody when you come to the doctor. Okay, now, before you raise your hand, this is before managed care. Okay? So he was a practicing physician. He would go, he has this letter that he wrote, and we have it published, that the craziness of his day, going to take care of the palace, everybody in the palace, and then having to rush across the courtyard to his office, and opening the door and seeing his office filled with people waiting to see him, and he laments that he hasn't had any time to eat or do Torah study because he's so busy. Listen to this. This is so cool. This is like when we go to the doctor. This is what's supposed to happen. 12th century. Maimonides demands much from the physician and the patient. He expects the physician to be a reservoir of knowledge concerning ethical, philosophical, and religious approaches to living, as well as an expert in diagnosis, understanding the body, and pharmacotherapy. First, the physician needs to obtain a clear understanding of the patient's subjective world and secure a diagnosis of the patient's psychological distress. Even if psychological stress is not manifest, it is assumed to exist, and the physician is required to search for it. Only after this psychological workup can the physician begin with a medical intervention. In other words, when you go to the doctor, and you walk into the doctor, and the doctor says, "What brings you here?" And you say, I got this pain. I don't know where it is. I can hardly breathe. I used to be able to run 6 miles. I can, and I don't know what it is. Can you give me something? Before that, according to Maimonides, says, "Sit down. Tell me about what's going on at home. What's going on in your life? How's the business? How's the job? How are your kids? How's your spouse? How's things at home? How's things at work? Have you ever in these situations which are giving you unbelievable stress?" I got this pain. Oh, yeah, we'll get to the pain. Only after I have examined exactly what's going on in the holistic approach to your life can then I begin to figure out, because as some of us know here, and this is especially true of older adults, that a lot of times that physical pain is a manifestation of some psychological issue. And we don't have the time. We're talking about this on Thursday at the medical school to medical students. So many older adults who are dealing with this plague of isolation because they're never visited, nobody takes care of them, nobody visits them. They go to the doctor with a pain or a thing, but really it's nothing more than I need somebody to talk to me. Nobody even touches me anymore. So I'm coming here. And this is not unusual. You probably know, maybe some of you know people who operate this way. So Maimonides' approach, this holistic, is really a magnificent approach to the theological understanding of the Jewish approach to health and wellness. But we always go back to the theological position that you're commanded to stay healthy so that you can stand in life before God. Listen to this. This is the next text. I'm going to hurry up because I only have a couple minutes. But listen to this. This is a letter, an essay called On the Preservation of Youth by Maimonides. This is 12th century, okay? One does not consider exercise, though it is the main principle in keeping one's health and in the repulsion of most illnesses. And there is no such thing as excessive body movements in exercise. Exercise removes the harm caused by most bad habits which most people have. And no movement is as beneficial, according to the physicians, as body movements and exercise. Exercise refers to both strong and weak movements, providing it is movement that is vigorous and affects breathing, increasing it. Aerobics, all right? Violent exercise causes fatigue, and not everyone can stand fatigue or needs it. It is good for the preservation of health to shorten those exercises. 12th century. So if you go to don't do that to him. And so, man, listen, I was on the bike at 6 o'clock this morning. So look, what you need to, this is fantastic to teach this. This is not New Age. This is Judaism from the 12th century, which basically says, get off the couch, get out, walk. So you'll go, if you take, there's tons of articles now, okay? They've just discovered this. All of a sudden, well, you're Dr. Oz, Dr. Moses, Dr. whatever, get up, get walking, it's good, be careful of what you eat. No, dude, just go back to study your Jewish text. It's all in the tradition. Before we close, I do want to bring you one other thing. Again, this is part of a much larger conversation. But one of the great challenges that we're facing right now within congregation land, and colleagues are dealing with it in an ever-increasing number, and that is the challenges dealing with mental health. And part of this conversation about Judaism and health really focuses in on the understanding that from the Bible, there is a Jewish approach and understanding of mental health. In the book of 1 Samuel, there's actually that conversation between David and King Saul, who is allegedly dealing with all kinds of issues such as melancholia, where the young Lieutenant David, who was an expert on the playing of a stringed musical instrument, was brought in to soothe him because he was dealing with, according to the Hebrew, a ruach ra'ah. And ruach is a spirit, and ra'ah is evil or sad. He was depressed. And music therapy, this is the first instance, according to many people, of the use of music therapy within the context of the Bible. But interestingly enough, what we've also found, and you can discuss this, and hopefully it's another passage that you can begin to think about, and I urge you, as many congregations are doing, is to really have a significant conversation of Judaism and mental health. Because in the Talmud, there's an actual diagnosis and conversation about somebody who's dealing with mental health issues. We don't teach you this enough. But given the rise of Alzheimer's and dementia and other psychological issues that are now confronting us, it's important for you to know that not only do we understand of this holistic approach of mind, body, and soul that draws itself from the tradition, but we actually have a diagnostic approach and a conversation in the Talmud which begins Ezehu Shoteh. The Shoteh is the Talmudic Aramaic definition of somebody who's dealing with a mental health issue. And we actually have a diagnosis and a conversation about that in the Talmud, about what makes up somebody who is a shoteh. The context of the conversation, and we don't have the time to go into the whole depth of it, But the context of the conversation is, can somebody who is dealing with a mental health concern be a witness at a bet din? Remember, this is a Talmudic discussion. And some of these conversations still hold today in 21st century America. Can somebody be a witness in a trial in the state of Connecticut if they have been deemed mentally incompetent? And so that's really the same context from the Talmudic conversation. The definitions of what makes up a shoteh, these are observational. This is before testing. So there's an observation. If certain people do certain things out of the ordinary. And there's a Maimonidean adaptation and extension of that definition. But he also talks about this holistic approach in his understanding. But you need to know that the language of the Talmud is extremely relevant. And let me just close with this test before. And we'll get to the Alzheimer's and dementia stuff after lunch, which ties into this. There's a phrase in the Talmud. The Hebrew, as we saw in the veins and arteries prayer, can be extremely literal. So there's a passage in the Talmud and the language of the Talmud that says Mara Shachora. Mara Shachora. Mara is a word that, in the context of the Talmud, that probably meant, if you remember your medieval text and from history, like a feeling or a bile. Remember the medieval definitions of illness, biles and stuff. But Mara also has that sense of bitterness. Maror coming up in a month and a half. Okay? Shachor is the Hebrew for
Shade.
darkness. So here you have a literal Hebrew expression of a dark sense, bile, feeling, bitterness. We would call that what? Melancholia or depression. Again, here you have the Jewish text literally giving you, some of you may know people who are suffering from clinical depression, and they'll tell you it's as if a dark cloud comes over me. There are other expressions in the Talmud we don't have time to go through, but they're equally as powerful in their literalness of the way they describe things. So I wanted to mention to you in this little time that we have that this idea of Jewish approach, even not only to physical health, but also to mental health as well. It's embedded in our tradition, and I would ask you, as you move forward into your program year, either this year or next year, that you will do a great service to people in this congregation to talk about this publicly, to have a program about this. More and more of our congregations are doing this because so many more people are attuned to the physical and mental health of their congregants. And if we teach them that this is part of who we are, it is part of our text, from the Bible to the Talmud to a lot of contemporary authors and writers who are writing about this from the context of Judaism, we will do a great service. So in conclusion, we're about to study the Parashat Pikudei and that idea of the Mishkan. So as we read it and study it, think about this as our Mishkan. And just as you treat the temple with respect and dignity, as Hillel said, how much the more so should you be commanded to treat this body with respect and dignity, because it is created, B'Tselem Elohim. Shabbat Shalom.